What's up YouTube, Dale here from Zeph War Games, and today I am bringing you guys an updated competitive profile for DDDs. Now I believe this is only my second DDD profile, and it is of course with help from Joe because he is the best DDD player from our locals and our area, so I could not build a deck without having him involved. It's kind of like him building a Dark Magician deck without me, so the two go together. Anyway, throughout this video I will be doing it in the exact same fashion that I did the previous one, so again a shout out to of course Winter Kills, who has inspired this style of recording going forward with everything else as well. But with all of that out of the way, please smash that like button, hit that notification bell and subscribe so you do not miss out on any more upcoming content from the channel. We will do, as we usually do, go through the list of the profile, then all of the cards in depth, and then we will try and show you some combos or test hands to show you how the deck operates and kind of moves from there. So, let's get into today's profile of DDDs. So, for the monsters of DDDs, we play triple double D Swell Slime, triple double D Necro Slime, triple double D Lamia, triple double D Kepler, triple D Oblivion King Ragnarok, triple double D Savant Copernicus, and a single triple D King Apocalypse, and a single double D Ghost. And in the hand traps we play triple Ash Blossom. Straightforward and simple. Now for the spells, we play triple Dark Contract with the Gate, a single Dark Contract with the Swamp King, and then all of our consistency cards being triple Where Art Thou, double Jack in the Hand, and then draw cards of triple Allure of Darkness, double Pot of Desires, with a double triple Tactic Talents, a single Called by the Grave, a single Spicy Reasoning, and a single Foolish Burial. Now, for the extra deck, there are some flex spots, and what we mean by this is there are 3 areas of the deck that you can change depending on the type of build you go for. So we play a double triple DDD Flame King Genghis, 1 triple D Flame King Genghis High, 1 Formula Synchron, 1 Satellite Warrior, 1 Crystal Wing, 1 triple D Cursed King Siegfried, 1 triple D Gust King Alexander, 1 Borrowed Savage Dragon, 1 triple D Abyss King Gilgamesh, 1 Cross Sheep, and for now, 1 Crystron Halifibrax. Now, as you can see, there is only 12 cards in front of you, so the remaining flex spots for this deck then comes down to your personal playstyle and personal preference. So the options you have for this are Shooting Riser Dragon, Hot Red Dragon Archfiend King Calamities, IP Masquerena for your Underworld of the Goddess plays, alongside a triple DDD Duo Dawn King Kali-Yuga, a triple High Wave King Caesar, a triple Wave Oblivion King Caesar Ragnarok, and an Appaloosa. So it really depends on your personal playstyle and which ones you want to be going for. For this particular profile, I'm going to be using IP Masquerena, Hot Red Dragon Archfiend Calamities, and the Underworld of the Goddess. So, let's get into the deck profile in depth and detail. So now we're going to go over the deck in as much detail as possible. So you start off with your core components being your triple DD Swell. I'm going to go through all 12 of these together as they all share the same purpose for consistency, and they are all your go-getters and go-starters for your combos. So you've got your triple Swell, the triple Necro, the triple Lamia, and then of course your triple Kepler. Now, these are the most important core cards in your entire deck, bar none. And there's your Savant Kepler. Now, why are these so important? Well, it's quite straightforward and simple. Swell Slime and Necro Slime are your fusion summon cards. So, Swell Slime allows you to fuse a DD from your extra deck by using a DD in your hand. 9 times out of 10, you want to use your Necro Slime because then in the graveyard, Necro Slime can banish itself plus another DD to fusion summon a DDD monster. Savant Kepler is your full-on out searcher. It can search you out the gate, and the gate then searches you out any one of these. So it is your core component to keep everything going. DD Lamia is your core synchro card that can also be floated back from the graveyard multiple times, but also mainly once through its own effect, to then be used as fodder for your Halley Firebrax plays, or of course to go into your synchro plays of your Curse King Siegfried, your Crystal Wing, and so on and so forth. One massive thing to keep in mind when you are playing DDDs. If a card says it will revive a DDD monster, it can only revive a DDD monster. But if a card says it can revive a DD monster, it can revive a DD or a DDD monster. I hope you all kept up with that. But the reason for that is quite simply, quite like times where it says specifically summon back or affect a particular type of monster, as long as it contains the digits of the least in the name, you can use it. So as you can see with Wave High King Caesar, for example, it has 2 Ds in the name already. So as long as the card says it can affect a DD monster, you are good to go and bring back either or. But if a card specifically says it can only bring back a triple D, you will only be able to use a triple D, because if you look at the double Ds, they don't have at least 3 Ds in the name. So with that all cleared up, that is pretty much all you need to know about your utility cards. The one additional thing that Swirl Slime will have is it can banish itself from the graveyard to special summon a DD card from your hand. So this is one of the very important things in which I'll show you on the Swirl Slime specifically. So Swirl Slime says, banish this card from the graveyard, special summon 1 DD monster from your hand. Now, because it says DD, you can summon down Necro Slime, Lamia, Kepler, even Accept Itself, even Ragnarok as well, because Ragnarok is a triple D, and when I find Ragnarok, because he is the next card that I will be showing you, even though he is a triple D, he does contain at least 2 Ds in his name. And that is all that matters when you are looking at a deck and an effect specifically like this. So, speaking of Oblivion King Abyss Ragnarok, why is he so important? Well, because he is an actual boss. He has got 3k defense, 2200 defense, but it has a scale effect and of course an on-field effect. You're probably going to be resolving the scale effect more times than not, but his on-field effect is not bad as well. So its scale effect is, if this card, if you special summon a DD monster, so again, if you bring back a DDD monster, it's completely fine. All monsters, except during a damage step, you can target 1 at DD, so it can target a triple D in the graveyard. Any battle damage your opponent takes is half, but if you're going first, it really doesn't matter. For the rest of this turn, you special summon that monster, and if you do, take 1000 damage. Only use this effect once per turn. Now, its monster effect is, if it is normal or specialed, you can target a triple D monster in your graveyard, again, specifically a triple D, so he cannot bring back Kepler, Lamia, anything like that. And special summon it. Only use the effect once per turn. And then on top of that, you can tribute 1 other DD monster, then target 1 monster your opponent controls and banish it. So it's got a nice target and banish removal rather than target and destruction removal. His other brother as well, the other scale, Thomas, they used to work really, really well together. They still do, but the game has kind of evolved and picked up pace in this particular version. If you want to go more for a rank 8 version, then you would put Thomas in. If you're going more for a Pendulum version, you will of course put Thomas in, because what Thomas can do is destroy itself and then set up the scales. Then wrapping up the triples, you play 3 DD Savant Copernicus. Now, the reason this card is so good is he's basically a Foolish Burial for the deck. And we've already talked about how important Necro Slime is in the graveyard to allow you to fuse, how important Lamia is in the graveyard to send a DD or Dark Contract to the graveyard to summon itself back, and we already know how important Swirl Slime is to be able to be banished to special summon down a DD monster. Now, the one thing while we are talking about Lamia is you cannot send a Pendulum Scale from the zones to the graveyard, which means you cannot revive Lamia by sending a scale, because it doesn't go to the graveyard. However, you can send a scale from your hand to the graveyard, because that's how the mechanics kind of work of the game of Yu-Gi-Oh! So, again, little note, you can't send this from the Pendulum Scale, but you can send it from the hand. Not just Copernicus himself, but DD Pendulum monsters. The scale effect is very rare you're going to resolve it or even use it, but you cannot pendulum summon monsters except DD monsters. This effect cannot be negated. Once while this card is in your pendulum zone, you can negate an activated spell effect that would inflict damage to you. Then destroy that card. So the idea is, back in the old days with original DDDs, is you would be relying on the gates, and the gates would burn you for 1,000 during your standby phase. So you'd play cards like Leonidas, you would play cards like Diarch, and they would either gain you life points or just kind of nullify that downside of that particular effect. It's the monster effect that is more important, and it's basically if this card is normal or special, you send one DD or Dark Contract card from your deck to the graveyard except himself. Only use the effect once per turn, so he is another form of Foolish Burial for the deck, as well as being a Dark, which is important, and of course as well as being a DD monster. Then wrapping up the DD monsters in the deck, we do play the one triple D Chaos King Apocalypse and the one double D Ghost. Ghost you never want to see in your hand because it will technically add as a neg. This is the card you 9 times out of 10 want to be summoning from the deck with your Halifibrax. No Halifibrax, very little reason to play Ghost if you are going down that route. But what Ghost can do is, if this card is sent to the graveyard, you can target one DD monster or Dark Contract card in your graveyard, except himself. Send one card from your deck to the graveyard, nice, bonus Foolish Burial, with the same name. And then if this card is banished, you can target one of your banished DD monsters or Dark Contract cards, except himself, and return it to the graveyard. So it allows you to Foolish Burial a second Lamia, and then reuse a Lamia after being banished. And this works in crazy good synergy with your King Apocalypse, because again, scale effect. You can banish 2 DD monsters from your graveyard and special summon this card from the Pendulum Zone. Synergy! Its monster effect. During your opponent's turn, if this card is in your hand or graveyard, you can target 2 face-up spell or trap cards you control. You cannot special summon monsters for the rest of this turn except Fiend-type monsters. Also destroy those targeted cards, and if you do, special summon this card. This is a quick effect, and you can only use it once per turn. Now, it's very rare that's going to happen, because the only way you're getting this guy in the graveyard is if you're using it as overlay material and then put it in the graveyard, or if you're sending it with Lamia, which we've already established you don't really want to do because you want to put him in the scale and then get a free summon. But it is just something to be aware of, that it does have an additional effect. Triple Ash Blossom. This actually needs a little bit of explaining, again, purely because of the type of deck you are playing. Now, with this particular deck, you are very combo orientated and combo heavy. You do not want to dilute your deck, because to get your best board, you do need anywhere from 3 to 4 cards, and they are specific cards as well, to get the maximum potential from your deck. So you don't want to be diluting your deck with too many hand traps, too many staple kind of kaijus or anything like that. You want to be making sure you've got draw cards, you've got consistent search cards, which we'll get onto with the spells in a minute. But you do have a little bit of room to play a hand trap, and the best hand trap to play right now, in my opinion, for generic overreach is Ash Blossom. Now, when you go to your locals, if your locals is they want to search all day long, then you're probably going to put Draw and Lockbirds in. If you're playing a opponent that don't expect Ghost Ogre and will probably lose if you drop a Ghost Ogre on them, then you'd play Ghost Ogre instead of Ash Blossom. Ash Blossom is, in my opinion, the most generic and all-round hand trap that will probably hit 99.9% of decks dead in their tracks, which is why you play it. Now, if you decide that you want your deck to be a full Ghost second deck, you'll probably put in Droplets over Ash Blossom. But again, like I said, with Droplet, keep in mind, you need 3 to 4 cards to pretty much go full combos. You have to be very careful with what you are sending. But this is a flex area that you can change and adapt depending on your local surroundings. Moving on to the spells. Again, what we'll do is we'll go through the consistent factors, the cards that are going to be searching you cards and why you're playing them, and then we'll talk about the draw cards and then all of the other little cards that go along with it. So, we'll start off with the most important spell in the entire deck, and that is a searchable every turn rotor, basically. So, Dark Contract with a Gate. During your main phase, you can add 1 DD monster from your deck to your hand. Only use the effect once per turn. And then once per turn, during your standby phase, you take 1,000 damage. So, you are instantly putting a ticking clock on your life points as soon as you play this, especially if you play Where Art Thou, which we'll get to in a little bit. But it is so consistent to every single turn go, search a Kepler, search a Swell Slime, search a Lamia, search a Necro Slime. And because it searches a DD monster, you can either go, search a Ragnarok, So it's so consistent, so powerful, so important that you can understand why you max this out, and this is why it's so important with Kepler getting to gate, and sometimes you actually need gate to be on the board so that Lamia has another target to send to then bring herself back, so you don't even need to worry about the burn. Beautiful synergy. Speaking of Dark Contract Gate, let's look at the other cards that search for you. So you've got your triple Where Art Thou. So all you need to do is control a level 1. Now, 9 times out of 10, playing your DDDs, you're going to either control Lamia at one point, or of course you're going to be controlling Kepler. That then means Where Art Thou can get you one of the missing components. The only component that it cannot get, which if you open up with Where Art Thou, the chances are you're going to search off your Swell Slime from your gate if you open up both, is of course Swell Slime. But other than that, Where Art Thou can get you your Necro Slime and the Lamia. The only issue with having Necro Slime in the hand is if you don't have a Swell Slime, you've not got an easy route to get it to the graveyard without a lot of fuss. If you do have a way of doing it, then that is where you adapt your plays, therefore making it a little bit more consistent. But again, the idea is that with Contract into Where Art Thou, you'd probably go Contract, search out Kepler, not even Kepler, sorry, Contract, search out Swell. And as long as you've got a Kepler, you can also on Kepler can search you out the Fusion Contract, and then off of the back of that, you've got Where Art Thou to trigger everything and make it go a little bit more. So again, more consistent synergy. One thing I do like about Kepler is that you could play Contract with the Witch, which is one of the trap cards, which I really, really like. But again, we're trying to make this deck as competitive as possible. Now, the other search card that we play in here is Jack in the Hand. Now, I've cut this down to 2. It is risky because what you are doing is you are giving your opponent a material and they are choosing as well. They get to choose first. But the idea is that from Jack in the Hand, you want to be revealing your Kepler, your Swell, and your Lamia. Now, obviously, these are the only level 1s you're playing in the deck, but you do need to get them. So the way you need to see it is Jack in the Hand. If your opponent doesn't know what these do, and even if they do, if your opponent doesn't know what else is in your hand, there's not really a losing scenario from this. The only downside is you're giving your opponent a free card. Now, ultimately, when you activate Jack in the Hand, when your opponent looks at this, they're going to go, right, okay, well, if I take Necro Slime and hope that they don't have it in hand, then they're not going to be able to fuse. If I take Lamia, then again, you've got to hope that Lamia is not in the hand. They're never, ever really going to want to let you get Kepler, because then Kepler just gets you the Contract, and then Contract then gets you any of the pieces that you're missing. So 9 out of 10, the chances are they're probably going to take your Kepler, which then means you're going to be adding your Necro Slime for your Fusion plays or your Lamia for your Synchro and Revival plays. Keep that in mind. It is risky because you are giving your opponent a card, so if they're playing Darks and they're playing Allure, they've got free Banish fodder. If they are playing anything that uses a lot of discard fodder, you're just giving them a free card for next to nothing. There's one big risky thing about it, but the deck, like I said, relies on its level 1s, relies on its consistency, which is why you play this card. Then for the draw cards to help your consistency that bit more, you've got triple Allure of Darkness and double Pot of Desires. Now, again, I'm not a huge fan of Desires in this deck. I'm less of a fan of Allure as well. But again, with Allure, because your combo, when you pretty much set up your perfect board, is nearly unbreakable. And what I mean by that is if you get to your Calamities, that's going to shut your opponent down for an entire turn, and your board is already going to be stuff like Calamities, Crystal Wing, Siegfried, and possibly some other cards. So you've got a lot more to play around with on that one. But with Allure of Darkness, it's a little bit less risky because you don't mind having multiple Swirls, you don't mind having multiple Copernicuses, Ragnaroks, Keplers, Lamias, all the stuff like that, because once you've used it once, you don't mind banishing it, because as long as you've got a second copy of it, they all just become additional fodder. That is what can also be said about the Desires, because you play a lot of free ofs. The one issue with Desires is if you do activate it, the one card, or the cards you do not want to be banished, are of course going to be your DD Ghost and going to be your DD Chaos King Apocalypse. So you only ever really want to be resolving Desires as a additional extender after the fact, or in times of desperation. Because losing your Ghost and your Apocalypse will, of course, stunt your combo plays. Losing Ghost means that your Halifibrax isn't going to be as consistent, because obviously you want to summon Ghost off of Halifibrax, not your Lamia. The Apocalypse, of course, is going to be a free extender which triggers Ghost. So you do take a little bit of a step back should you lose them, which is why Desires is risky. But again, because of pure consistency and the fact the extra deck is really tight, you can't really rely on stuff like Pot of Extravagance or Prosperity. The only other draw card that I would possibly consider in this deck would be Avarice. Just so on the fact that you can burn through your extra deck and then put it all back in to draw 2 additional cards. Something to look into. It depends on personal preference, but right now Desires is the best option that we have. Then as a draw card and a deterrent, or just a way of getting back into the game if you do get hit with an Ash Blossom or a hand trap, is something like Triple Tactical Talents. Now, right now it's not amazing going second, because the chances are if you're placing a VSD, which hopefully, fingers crossed, won't be here much longer because of course, the ban list. What Talents does do is, this deck is very reliant on its summons. It does do a lot of searching. Now, you could play the Gamma package, but the only time Gamma is going to come into use for you to protect you is off of your gate. Now, if your opponent is smart enough, what they would probably do is they'll probably let the gate go through, let you search the piece, and then the second you put another piece on the board, that's when they're going to hit you. Because at that point there, that's where it all depends on what else you have in your hand. Another weakness about this deck is it does get to a choking point where it gets to a point where you've got to go, right, okay, my next summon is going to be a negate, so if my opponent has a Nibiru, they're going to drop it on me now, and that's where it's really going to hurt me, because it'll technically put me back to square one. So again, you've got a lot to consider, a lot to think about as well, and what you ideally want to be doing with this is you want to make sure that at the choking point, you've already got a way of going, right, if my opponent Nibiru's me now, I still have a way of getting back into the game and resetting the state, which is again why Talents can be very helpful, because that additional draw 2 could then still set you up your Swell Slime, your Necro Slime, and just get you further plays just to kind of rebound back into the game. Then of course we've got the Fusion Gate, so the Dark Contract with the Swamp King. This basically just allows you to fusion summon one Fiend type fusion monster from your extra deck, using monsters from your hand or your side of field as fusion material. You can only use the effect once per turn, and then if you're summoning a DD fusion monster this way, you can also banish monsters from your graveyard as fusion material. Now, all of your DD fusion monsters do not require, like, they're not a DD plus another monster, they're all DD monsters. So the reason this is so consistent is, again, you're able to pretty much banish the cards from your graveyard, so it takes away one of the big components of fusion summoning, and that is needing a fusion spell plus 2 components to fuse together. So once you've already used them with your Swirl, your Necro Slime, anything like that, once you've already gone through your cards, put them into the graveyard, you no longer need them, that's where Dark Contract with the Swamp King can come in, because then it gives you a further extender to get into your fusion plays. Then for the last one, of course, we've got the Call by the Grave, because you want to stop the draws, you want to stop the ashes, you want to be able to resolve your effects as consistently as possible, and we can't play any more than one. Foolish Burial. We've already talked about how important it is to be playing Copernicus, so why not play a spell that is clearly at 1 for a particular reason, to not only set up your Swell Slime plays, but also your Necro Slime plays and your Lamia plays as well. And then finally, I've teched in a Reasoning, purely because we actually run, including Ash Blossom, you run levels 1s, 2s, 3s, 4s, 8s, and I'm pretty sure there's even 7s in here as well, if you do consider your... where are you? Triple D, Chaos King, Apocalypse as well. So it's just a form of additional extension. Again, in those scenarios where your opponent Ash Blossoms you or anything like that, if you can resolve a Reasoning, which, yes, the more logical time your opponent will probably want to call 1. If you do resolve it, even if you resolve it into a Swell Slime, you just link them off, and you could go into a Genghis, or of course you can go into... an IP Masquerena should you choose to play that card, and that then allows you to then reignite your hand, reignite your turn, because you put a Swirl in the graveyard. The Swirl can then be banished to bring down a Ragnarok, and then you can continue to move your plays further forward that way. Now, as you can see, there are no trap cards for this deck because it is combo heavy. It's all about consistency. It's all about getting to your core components so you can rush to your combo as early as you possibly can and as consistently as you can, which is where trap cards come in to slow it down. But that's where trap cards probably come in more of the side deck, where you then adapt your deck and your playstyle to what you know you are facing. Now, moving on to the extra deck, we'll go over the core components. We'll go over the fusions first. And you're only playing 3 fusions in this one. And we're playing double DD King Genghis and 1 triple D Flame High King Genghis. Now, these are the core cards you're going into. You're going to go into this guy twice. You're going to burn through all of these in your first combo, which is why it's so important. So this one requires 2 DD monsters. This one requires a level 5 or higher DD monster and 1 DD monster. So, if another DD monster or monsters is special summoned to the field while you control this face-up card except during a damage step, you can type one DD monster in your graveyard and special summon it. Only use the effect once per turn. And then if this card is destroyed by battle or by an opponent's card effect, you can target one dark contract card in the graveyard and add it back to your hand. So, less consistent using the secondary effect, but it does come up. So make sure you always remember the full effects of the cards. Your high flanking is if another DD monster or monsters is normal or special to your field while you control this monster, except during a damage step, you can target one DD monster in your graveyard and special summon it. Only use the effect once per turn, and then once per turn, when a spell or trap or effect is activated, quick effect, you can negate the activation. So he can be left on the board as a nice little bit of a negator, but he's also there as a free extender as well to bring back some of your lower level DDDs. Moving on to the Link monsters, considering, apart from the flex cards, which I'll get to in a minute, you play 3 core cards, which all DD decks should probably be playing, and that is, of course, your DDD Abyss King Gilgamesh, your Crystron Halley Firebrax, and your Cross Sheep. Now, I wanted to try and build the deck without it, but without Halley Firebrax, that is, but it just offers so much to the deck. It offers free extenders, it offers interruptions during your opponent's turn, and it instigates the Calamities and Satellite Warrior plays. So obviously, if you don't have Halley Firebrax, that is probably where your Satellite Warrior and, of course, your Calamities will come out for the other flex spots, being your Triple D Wave High King Caesar, or, of course, your Kali Yugioh. Keep in mind, Konami have only just given it an ulti, so I'm kind of on that borderline of maybe they won't ban it, but if it does happen, the deck will be adaptive and Joe will provide you with an update. The Triple D Abyss King Gilgamesh requires specifically 2 DD monsters, so it is not generic. That is a big shame, but what it does do is if this card is special summoned, you can activate this effect. You cannot special summon monsters for the rest of the turn, except DD monsters, and you can place 2 DD Pendulum monsters with different names from your deck in the Pendulum Zone. And if you do, take 1000 damage. If the Link Summon card is destroyed by battle with an opponent's attacking monster or by an opponent's card effect while in its owner's monster zone, you can special summon 1 DD monster from your extra deck or graveyard in defense position. Now, keep in mind, the chances are, when you make Gilgamesh, you're going to leave him on the board. He's not going to go anywhere because you don't have any higher level Link DDDs. You'll probably use him as fusion material if you could. But what that is also going to do is it is going to bring out from your deck, is it's going to set up a Ragnarok, and it's also going to set up your Abyss King as well. That then provides you with additional extenders because you're probably going to have a Ghost on that port, and then you're going to bring out your Abyss King. That is how you are able to link and get into your synchro plays during your opponent's turn with your Halley Firebrax, which is really, really important and does give you more utility and more extension. So something to keep in mind that it is for the rest of the turn. So you've got to make sure that Gilgamesh is one of the last Link summons you make, if not the last Link summon that you do make. We don't really need to touch on Crystron Halley Firebrax. The reason this is so good is it brings Ghost out of the deck, which then allows you to trigger off to put it into the graveyard, to then banish it, to then get all of the additional recursion effects going. But on top of that, it also sets you up with 2 tuners to be used for your Hot Red Dragon Archfiend King Calamity. And the way it does that is during your opponent's turn, it can tag himself out and it can summon out your Formula Synchron. That then allows you to get an additional draw. And then that is your second tuner to go into your Calamity. It can also get you into a Riser Dragon, and the Riser Dragon can adapt its level so that you open up your window to more synchro materials, synchro monsters, and synchro plays, depending on the route you want to go. So if you're unable to make a Savage Dragon because you've been interrupted, but you've been able to make a Halley Firebrax, that still opens the door for you to make a Savage during your opponent's turn. Another very important thing to keep in mind as well is if you do trigger Halley Firebrax while you have Cross Sheep on the board, if Cross Sheep is pointing to a fusion and or a synchro, or you bring back another card, you can then trigger Cross Sheep to revive, which is a nice way of walling up during your opponent's turn. Speaking of Cross Sheep, one thing that a lot of people overread or miss a little bit is its effect will trigger depending on the cards it points to. Not when it triggers when a card is summoned to a zone it points to, but it doesn't need to trigger that moment. So what I mean by this is, if you were to summon a fusion monster to a zone Cross Sheep points to and wait, not trigger the effect, and then summon a synchro monster to a zone Cross Sheep points to, you can then trigger Cross Sheep's effect to not only get the revival effect of the fusion, but also get the attack change from the synchro as well. So it's very important that Cross Sheep triggers the effects of what it points to, not what is summoned to its zone. So it's very important to keep that in mind. It's one thing that a lot of people overlook, but that also gives you a lot of consistency, a lot of revival, and the nice little added bonus of specifically all monsters you control gaining 700 attack. So it makes it a little bit harder for them to just attack over a Halifabrax or attack over a Gilgamesh or even attack over any of your monsters that may be a little bit weaker. Now, moving into the synchros. Actually, we'll go into the synchros first and then we'll talk about the free flex spots that I've put in. So for the synchros, we've got your Formula Synchron that's coming off the back of Halifabrax. If played correctly, this is where Cross Sheep can come into play, because Cross Sheep can then bring back the Formula Synchron, and then Formula Synchron is not a hard once per turn to synchro. So what you then are able to do is your Formula Synchron can then synchro again after being used off of Halifabrax. You've then got your Gust King Alexander. Now this is going to be used as a stepping stone and a revival effect. So again, it specifically requires one DD tuner, which will be Lamia, which then means your non-tuner monsters will probably be a level 6, which is going to be your Gilgamesh. Not Gilgamesh, sorry, your Genghis. If another DD monster or monsters is normal or special to your field while you control this face-up card, except during a down step, target a level 4 or lower DD monster in your graveyard and special summon it. Only use the effect once per turn. Remember what I said to you about being able to loop Lamia? This is how you do it. Then 9 out of 10, what you're going to be doing is you're going to be using the Lamia you've just brought back with your Gust King Alexander to go into your Crystal Wing. But you could also end up going into your Siegfried, or you can end up going into your Savage Dragon, which is why you play a lot of level 8s. Now, obviously, all of these level 8s are mainly defensive. So if you wanted to spice in a bit of an aggressive one, mainly the Chaos Synchro monster as well, to excavate and add, that can also be played in here, which is why it is an area for flex, where you can change up and adapt to what you like playing and the particular playstyle you like going for. The final synchro that isn't within a flex spot but could be in a flex spot is Satellite Warrior, and the reason this is so good is it requires one tuner plus one or more non-tuner synchro monsters, which is what is going to be coming off of Halifabrax. So if this card is synchro summoned, and it is a level 10, so it does require either your Curse King Siegfried, your Crystal Wing, or of course your Savage Dragon, which if you've already activated the negation effects, that's when you're going to use them as free fodder. Gets you into a Satellite Warrior, and then you get to target card your opponent controls up to the number of synchro monsters in your graveyard and destroy them. Now the chances are, if you've got to this point, you will get the synchro monster that comes off of Halifabrax, the monster that you use to synchro with, and then you'll have at least your DDD Gust King Alexander in the graveyard, unless you've banished him for an effect. That lets you clear off 3 of your opponent's cards, which is really, really important. It then also gains 1,000 attack points for each, so it's going to be going up to a nice 5,500 beta. Now the second effect is less relevant because it's all about having Warrior, Synchron, or Stardust Synchro monsters in your graveyard, which you are not going to have by that point. Now the free flex spots. Now the flex spots are here just so you can adapt it to your personal playstyle, but what we've kind of gone for is the IP Masquerena, and the reason I've gone with IP Masquerena is so that it can lead consistently into Underworld of the Goddess, and the reason that we've gone for the Underworld of the Goddess is just a nice little Fiend Link 5 that you're going to consistently have a lot of monsters on the board, but it does give you an alternate route should your opponent try to interrupt or disrupt this route of play. You can take these out completely. It does give you another link to option. Your link 2s you're probably going to be going to more times than not will end. Last one will be Gilgamesh, your first one will probably be Cross Sheep, and your second one will be Halifabrax. So IP Masquerena is just there as an alternative. If I don't want to go Gilgamesh, I could go IP. But then that changes your route of play, because then not only could you play Goddess of the Closed World, but you could play stuff like Avramax, you could play stuff like Appaloosa as well. So it really depends on your play style and where you want to go. The final flex spot is your Hot Red Dragon Archfiend King Calamity. Now, it has a lot of pros, but a lot of cons too. So, it requires 2 tuners plus 1 non-tuner Dark Dragon Synchro monster. The only Dark Dragon Synchro monster we play is Savage Dragon. So, the only time you're going to be making Hot Red Dragon Archfiend King Calamity is after you've used Savage Dragon's effect, which means you have to be able to get Savage Dragon on the board, because if you can't, you're not going to be able to make Calamity. And then because it requires 2 tuners, you've got your Formula Synchron, and then you need to leave DD Ghost on the board as well. Otherwise, it's not going to happen. But if you do play that very, 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 very high cost, and you summon him correctly, it is a when this card is synchro summoned, you activate this effect. For the rest of this turn, your opponent cannot activate cards. Also, cards your opponent controls cannot activate their effects. Your opponent cannot activate cards or effects in response to the effect activation, and if this card destroys an opponent's monster by battle, inflict damage to your opponent equal to that monster's original attack. If this card in its owner's possession is destroyed by an opponent's card effect or by battle, you can type 1 level 8 or lower Dark Dragon Synchro monster in your graveyard and special summon it. The idea is you make Bane, your opponent goes pass. And you're going to be able to protect the summon of Bane because you're going to be able to protect the summon of Bane being negated, more so from Halley Firebrax being negated with a Crystal Wing, a Savage Dragon, or a Siegfried, or a mixture of all of them. That then gives you Calamity, and Calamity says, alright, that's it, opponent's not playing anymore. And then during the next turn, unless your opponent's just going to set 5 and pass, Calamity's then going to be able to go in and start smashing through life points. Not to mention that at that point as well, you should also have a Siegfried or, of course, a Crystal Wing that's going to help you do that even more, and you'll still have the cards you've recurred through Ghost, you've drawn off of your Formula Synchron, and then your normal draw, and if you've left Contract on the board, you've got an additional search, which allows you to get into the remaining pieces or the remaining DDD monsters that you have not yet used. So that is the in-depth profile. I'll quickly go over the flex spots for you as well. So the flex spots, or the alternative cards, are Triple D, Wave High King Caesar, and Kali Yuga. Now this is specifically more if you're going to be able to bring out level 8, so that's where Thomas comes into play, level 6s as well. So your Caesar is when a spell or trap or monster effect is activated that includes the effect that special summons a monster. Quick effect, you detach a material from this card and negate the activation if you do destroy that card. Then you can make one other DD monster you control, and this card, gain 1800 attack until the end of this turn. If this card is sent from the field to the graveyard, you add 1 Dark Contract card from your deck to your hand. Nice. Kali Yuga is pretty much what Abyss Bane Calamity is, and it's basically like summon, opponent goes no, and it's a heavy Storm Duster to deal with all the back row. Other cards you can also put in here are stuff like Hope Harbinger as well, but that then means, like I said, that's where Thomas comes into play, and that's where you go more of a rank 8 route of play. The Triple D Wave Oblivion King Caesar Ragnarok is just an old school card that requires specifically 2 Triple D monsters, but when it declares an attack, or when an attack is declared involving this card, you get to target another DD or Dark Contract card you control, return it to the hand, and if you do, you get to equip 1 face-up monster your opponent controls to this card. So it's a nice way of getting past certain roadblocks. I've already talked on how Shooting Riser could be used in the deck just because it can abuse its level. It basically becomes a Foolish Barrel that abuses levels, but you've got to keep in mind that what it's going to be doing 9 times out of 10 is only going to be dropping by 1 or 2s. You're not going to be dropping it by huge amounts unless you're starting to send your Copernicus. And then Appaloosa is just another option that you can use an IP Masquerena to get into Appaloosa to then kind of lock the board down and slow it down completely. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is it. I was going to do test stands for you, but I think what I will do, because this is quite a long video and I've gone in a lot of depth, is if you would like to see test stands for this particular build, then please smash that like button, hit that notification bell and subscribe. Get this video up to at least 50 likes and I will bring you the full entire test hand of this deck. Before we go, I will go over the list one last time in slow motion so that you can see everything that we have to offer. But for now, this has been Dale from Zephyr Wargames. Thank you so much for watching. As absolutely always, guys, stay safe and happy dueling.